Welcome to Section 5, Video 5, Adding Functionality to our Pause menu. In this video, we are going to add functionality to our Pause menu and Death menu and connect our player character to our Pause menu. So first we are going to open up the player's code and connect our Pause menu to our Pause game function within the player's code via the inputs. Let's open up the characters folder in our C++ classes and open up our player character. Inside of our source file, in the player input component, we are binding the action for pause game when it's pressed to the pause game function. Here we are just binding it for our player for when it's pressed, and the reason for why we didn't bind it for unpausing the game is because when we call the pause game function, we are calling to change the input mode to UI only, which blocks key input from our player controller, but not the mouse, and is used for UMG only. When we are in game mode only, then the player controller doesn't block any inputs, and there is also a game and UI input mode that allows for UI and key input to be used at the same time and also be used for UMG in the game, and doesn't block input either. Now let's open up our pause game file in the header and source file. So inside of our header file, we are first declaring and overriding a virtual function that is protected within the user widget class that returns a boolean named initialize. This occurs when we select the compile button within the blueprint editor in the Unreal Engine, and it will return true if we compiled successfully and false if we didn't compile successfully. Then under the private category, we declare a bunch of variables and functions. Honestly, it's going to be 3 variables and 3 functions. Starting with the resume button pointer variable, it is of type uButton, which is a subclass of uWidget. We have a uProperty with the meta tag bindWidget, which means it will search within this UMG widget and see if any buttons have the same exact name as the variable's name, and it is case sensitive. So in this case, it'll search for resume button with the exact same camel case written name. If it didn't find a button with this variable's name, then it will give an error when we compile in the UMG widget until we find a button with the same name. Then we have a function for when this button is clicked, which in this case is onResumeClicked, which we are going to bind to a uButton specific delegate named onClicked for the resume button. And we will repeat this same format twice for the desktop button and the main menu button. Let's create our definitions really quick. Now that our definitions have been created, let's go into our source file and fill out those definitions. Here we are including our libraries for the button, which is located in the components folder, and the uGameplayStatics function library, and the player's library, so that way we know this is the player, and we have some sort of context of the player. Inside of our initialize function, first we are calling the super function of initialize, which will return a boolean and check if it is false. So if the parent version of initialize failed, then there is no point in continuing and return false, since if our parent failed, we're probably going to fail being created or something or initialized. So if the parent version did not fail, then we check if the UMG widget properly found the resume button and the desktop button and the main menu buttons through a valid check for each one, and then we bind the onClick delegate for that specific button, which in this case would be resume button for desktop, and main menu button would be separate, and we bind it to their onClicked functions that we created, which for the resume button would be onClicked for onResumeClicked. And we just repeat this for every button that we need to bind in C++. And then finally we return true and exit the function since we are finished and successfully did everything that we need to do when we are initialized. Inside of our onResumeClicked, here we are getting a reference to the player class, similar to how we did in the widget gameplay class, and then we check if it's a valid reference, and then if it is, unpause the game. Here we are calling the console command quit the same way we did within our blueprint for the main menu, but in this case it is in C++. The difference between getOwningPlayer and getOwningPlayerPawn is that it returns a pawn for the owning player pawn, and the getOwningPlayer returns a player controller. Inside of our onMenuClicked function, we are just opening the level explicitly to map main menu. Now, if you wanted to make this a variable instead of explicitly typing it in, you may refer back to our level-ending-actor class, which does it the exact same way. Now let's save all, select build, or actually let's do this in C++ in our Unreal Engine editor. Let's open the Unreal editor and select compile. While that's compiling, let's go into our blueprints folder and open up our player character BP, and let's remove onDeath code that we wrote in blueprint and select compile and save, since we now have our onDeath menu, so we don't need to respawn the player automatically anymore. We can close that. Let's open our generic HUD blueprint, and let's bind our deadMenu class and our pauseMenu class to their widget classes. For deadMenu, we will use deadMenu.wb, and for pauseMenu and our compile finished, we will use the pauseMenu.wb. Compile, save, and let's close that. And inside of our widgets, let's add our functionality to our deadMenu in Blueprint for time's sake. We can delete these 3 starting nodes and select our respawn button within the variables graph and select onClicked in the details panel, and it will create that node for us, and let's repeat that for the main menu and desktop button. For our respawn button, we will get the game mode, drag out of the return value and cast to our gameplay game mode, and we will call the function respawnPlayer. Apparently we are just getting the owning player. For our main menu button, we are just going to open the level main menu, or map main menu. And for our desktop button, we can actually grab the owning player again, right click and enter an execute console command, and connect our specific player to the owning player, and call the command quit. Let's save and compile, and let's test this by hitting play, and our backspace key should also open up the pause menu, and it did. We can select resume game, and now we can play the game again. If I close this and play this again and subtract our health all the way to 0, we die and we can't move around or look around or anything like that. So we can respawn, and when we die again, we can quit to the main menu, we can start the game, pause it, quit to main menu, start game, pause it, quit to desktop, and it all seems to work. So in summary, we've set up our main menu and level, created our level ending actor, and set up our pause menu and death menu. In the next section, we will be creating interactable objects and shipping the game.